Tony, what's happening?
Matt, thanks for having me on.
So I wanted to get you on and talk about your memories of the draft and the whole bit, but I also really wanted to focus on the ups and downs that you have had in your life and how we can help people get through their ups and downs and what you went through. I want to start with the cover before we get into your kind of,
Yeah.
where you grew up and the whole bit. When you remember that cover, when you look at that cover, is there ever a part of you that just says, I wish that didn't happen? Or was that part of your journey?
No, I don't. I thought I still am glad that it happened. At a time in 1989, a time before the internet, that like media narrative, if you will. I mean, you talk about millions and millions and millions of dollars of advertising you would have to spend to get that kind of coverage.
Right?
And, I got it because, it was, an editor at SI wanted the story and I was willing to give it. And, actually, I forget the guy's name, the gentleman, he was actually from Chicago Tribune, the guy that wrote the story. He's, I think, a longtime writer at Chicago, but Tellender.
Yeah, Rick Tellender.
Yeah, Rick Tellender.
Yeah.
So he did the story and really hung out for like, I want to say almost 10 days. And
Wow.
half of those days were in East Lansing when I was still there. And then the other half were in California. And that photo was actually taken on the breaking rocks on Venice Beach, right on the ocean.
Cool.
And it was, pre-digital photography. So it was actually that photo, believe it or not, here's a story inside a story that some people know. That photo shoot is what sparked my interest in photography.
Cool.
Even though I didn't make it, something I did for a living until, 2005. Some of the stuff that the photographer did was just incredible. And of course, they were showing me Polaroids, right? For proofs.
Right.
I was amazed that he could shape the light the way he was shaping it, and I'm sure he was using strobes and diffusers. To me, it was like, it's just like the sunset, right? The light's hitting you at the golden hour. And then when he showed me the Polaroid, I just couldn't believe how different it was, the way he saw it. So that's what really piqued my interest in that. But it was, I don't regret it at all. I look back, not often I look back at that cover, but I look back at it and, you know, I don't sit there and overanalyze myself, but at that time period, um, I mean, you're inexperienced with media. Um, you want to, as an offensive lineman, you want to make as much attention as possible because the only other attention you get is penalties,
Yep.
right? Like holding calls. So I wanted to, bring a lot of that stuff that they talked about in that SI story really is what was going on. I mean, the Guns N' Roses stuff and working out and doing, squatting and doing legs till you throw up and like all that was true. Um, and there were some things the way in there that were twisted that weren't as, I mean, there was some truth to them, but not a lot, not as much as the story might sound. But there was definitely a lot of truth to it. And it was that cover was a huge game changer for me as far as media push.
No doubt.
Because after that cover, the draft happened and then, getting calls from David Letterman to be on Letterman and growing up, it's like Letterman's my favorite, late night guy, right?
Totally.
And you're, kind of sitting there going, is this really happening?
Yeah.
And one of the things that I remember is being at the airport, LAX, because I lived in Whittier for a year. Being at the airport at LAX and seeing LAX and airports now are like shopping malls, but they used to have only like 3 or 4 like areas that were newspaper stores. You can get a
Right.
water or something. But they had the whole top of the store on the inside lined up with that SI cover, just magazine after magazine after magazine. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, this is like bigger than I even
That's when
thought it
that's
was.
when it hit you like, Wow.
Yes.
So before we get into, because you grew up in Canada, your parents were from Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
I think that I want to get into the fact that you moved in with your brother. He became your legal guardian, if I'm not
Correct.
mistaken. And I
Correct.
think that's really interesting. But I want to just go back to something you said. I'm a huge proponent of when you put millions of dollars and spotlight on 19, 20, 20. I know what I was doing at that age. Like I was out every night getting drunk, doing this, didn't care about anything. I look at guys like Ryan Leaf and Johnny Manziel. People take shots at them, and I think Ryan Leaf has done an incredible job of turning
Yeah.
his life
Oh, he
around.
sure has.
I look at him on social media as the guy he gets pinged at, and he just says, "Hey, man, I made mistakes." I'm a big proponent in helping these younger athletes figuring out what to do with their money. They're gonna get so much money thrown at them. They're gonna have people pinging them, cousins they didn't know of, whatever it is. How did you deal with that, and how do you think it should be dealt with going forward? Because to me, that's one of the major issues that causes big
Yeah.
issues in people's lives.
Agreed. Especially at that, at that age, really at almost at any age, but at that age, you're being pulled in so many different directions because of the demand for you, like for your brand, whatever it is. Uh, for a young person, 19, 20, 21 years old, that's a lot. And most of them will have some difficulty handling it. Some won't. Like one of the guys I would say that really transitioned phenomenal was Peyton Manning.
Absolutely.
When he walked into the locker room at Indy when I was there, like he walked in like a pro. And, I thought to myself, why couldn't I have done that? I thought in my head, right? Like, why couldn't I have? But, some people will say, well, he was, groomed how to be a professional by his dad.
That's what I was
But,
gonna say.
but that being said, my dad and my mom and dad, even though they weren't, you know, Hall of Famers like Archie was, or like as well known as Archie. I mean, the principles and the values that they taught were extremely probably along the same lines. So there might have been some, smaller things like this, how you deal with media, and this that Archie taught Peyton, but at the end of the day, Peyton still has the final call on how he's going to act, what he's going to do, and just like I did, and obviously I acted in a lot of ways, arrogantly, flamboyantly, for the purpose of getting attention and trying to make, I mean, I'm not shy to say this, you try to make as much money as you can because that career is short-lived. And
Isn't it what we wanted you to do as fans?
exactly. And it's like, yeah, it's interesting that way, especially in a pre-internet era.
Yeah.
Now now the competition is even though it's out, like even though you have much more access to as a player or a father as their son or daughter, or a coach that can promote their son or daughter or player to the media and to professional teams. um there's so much more competition on social media and in the media. I think and you'll remember this. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think Sports Illustrated was one of like the authorities in sports at that time.
Absolutely.
Like they were a go-to,
Yep.
kind of like ESPN used to be. ESPN to me used to be a go-to. Um, and it's, if I wanted, you, you know, solid foundational stuff from sports, those were the two sources I went to. If I wanted for news, I would go to other places.
So Sports Illustrated builds you up, and then I'm not taking a shot at them, but then the bust cover comes out years later.
Mhm.
It builds you up to tear you down.
Yeah.
I feel like that's what society loves. I think jealousy is a big thing. How do you handle that? How bad did it get for you? And how did you handle the being is so high. And can you think back to any things that happened where you're just like, why is that person trying to tear me down, or why are they trying to tear me down?
Yeah. Yeah, I thought of that many times back in the day. I thought like when that 4 years later, when that incredible bust cover came out, that was 1993. So
Mm-hmm.
still pre-internet.
Yep.
So still they're still the authority in sport, and they're getting as much traction as they did 4 years prior.
Right.
So yeah, that was one that hurt. And you know, that made me question myself as well as, you know, the reporting, again, that second article, yeah, there was a lot of truths in it. There was a lot of things that weren't true in it. They're just, I don't know. I've never been a fan of people that, um, or sources that are anonymous, It's kind of like, well, you can just make your own stuff up really at that point. So it was in a way, it was, great. If you're going to play that game of media, you've got to know the highs and the lows and the consequences and the benefits and all that stuff. So, and if you're going to play in that arena, just be aware that they will turn on you so quick because it's, right now, and we'll just use general news right now. And I won't point out any news, legacy news um, areas, but it's kind of like who's ever fastest to the story, like trumps the truth of the story.
They shape the whole
Yeah,
story, whether it's true or
yeah,
not.
yeah.
Yeah.
And to me, that is like, okay, now you're flat out lying.
Yeah.
And and it's too bad because there are a lot of so many great writers and you know, people that write editorials that, that have made me read certain things. And I'm talking now decades ago that have made me go, wow, like I never looked at it that way, whatever it was, whether it was a government thing or a sports thing or whatever, it just gave me a different perspective. Now I like have to filter through 90% of the BS to get a perspective of somewhat that I trust and then reflect on how my views are on it.
I'll be honest with you, man. You go on Twitter, you have no idea what's real and what's not at this point. I want to
Or
talk about your teammates. What
yeah,
is it like for someone of your stature? And there's all kinds of the Ryan Leafs of the world, like I was talking about with you before we did this interview. Did your teammates at Michigan State or at Green Bay, any of them resent how big you were? You played with Lorenzo White. You played with, guys at Michigan State that I grew up, watching. Sterling Sharp at the Packers.
yeah.
Was it tough at all dealing with teammates? Did they resent you because of you were trying to build your status kind of outside of football?
Yeah, there was a few at Michigan State. There was a few in the pros, and specific to being teammates.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was. I think you get 53 guys on an NFL roster, and I think the practice squad is 10 or 15 players. I don't even know what it is now. Um, so you have a 65, 70 man roster. You're not going to agree with everybody. Not everybody's going to agree with you.
Right. Right.
There was a lot of there was a lot of players on the offensive line that kind of looked at it as, hey, this is good because he kind of broke the $1 million a year salary barrier for
He's
O-line.
boosting the offensive lineman up to
Yeah.
get no recognition.
Yeah, exactly. And there
Yeah.
was guys that should have been making that kind of money. A lot of guys not just on my team, but on the NFL that should have been making that kind of money that like Munoz and Jackie Slater and
Totally.
it's like you look at some of their salaries when they started, it was like less than 200,000, 100,000. And you're
Unbelievable.
talking about these guys are Hall of Famers, they're icons, guys that I, followed. And so there was a lot of guys in the O-line room that kind of knew this is going to help them and offensive linemen in the long run. And but there was a few that were extremely resentful,
Yeah.
extremely, especially in Green
In,
Bay.
in that draft, Um, you've heard it 1,000 times. It's Aikman to the Cowboys, you to the Packers, Barry Sanders to the Lions, Derek Thomas to the Chiefs, Dion to the Falcons. I didn't remember how when I was before I was doing my research for the interview. It's just nuts. Um,
It's crazy.
it really is. You get drafted by the Packers. You mentioned the term they're a village. It's
Mhm.
just incredible to me how it's so meaningless to me. I'm from Chicago. I know Green Bay, and they're territorial because they're the small group and they're so passionate. How big of a deal? I didn't realize it was that big of a deal, but it got you off on the wrong foot, pretty much, huh?
Yeah, yeah, and the holdout, right? Not
Yep.
not signing until I think I signed September 5th, which was like 3 or 4 days before the first game, opening kickoff, like for the
Wow.
season. So they put me on like a 2 week roster exemption because of the contract, and the NFL agreed to it. So they knew that they would have to get rid of a roster spot in 2 weeks when they activated me. But I could, practice, I could participate in the meetings and all that stuff. I do everything but play.
Yep.
Um, but it was a huge impact. But I will say this about the Green Bay fans. They they were pretty gracious. Even the nonsense that I said, they were still welcoming. Um, and I believe the media painted it as a little bit more like that they were mad at me. And I believe some of them were, as they should have been. Um, but I think after not much time, they welcomed me with open arms. And Green Bay's it's middle America. It's blue collar. It's a lot of immigrants. There's a lot of people like me that were first generation North American,
Right.
and they're salt of the earth people. And that's why, I look now, I look at Wisconsin on the map. I'm thinking, how can that be a liberal state? Because
Right.
I associate blue collar, hardworking with conservative, right? And but there's so many other dynamics that go into it politically. So it's like so much of it you can discount.
I want to go back to a line I saw you in a video say that I'm gonna steal from you. Sorry. Why not me? I just love that. It started with you getting sober and how you were at these meetings and there's rows of people and only one. I'm getting the stats wrong. You'll help
Oh,
me.
you're
One of every of the 100 people in there is going to stay sober, and you looked at yourself and said, "Why not me?" The same with being the top pick in the draft or making the Michigan State team, whatever it is. Talk to me about why not me. I love it.
well, and I'll go back to when I was 11 years old and kind of made a conscious decision that what I wanted to do for a living. I made a career decision. I wanted to play in the NFL. And it was so many friends and, schoolmates where I went to high school in Canada were like, some of them would eye roll, and just be like, whatever, that's such a pipe dream, right? And
Right.
I thought, it is, it's a long shot. So many things, you could do everything right and the circumstances still not be right. So, but I was like, I'll never know unless I give it everything I have
Yeah.
daily. And if it doesn't work out, well, it's not because it was a lack of effort from myself, or it was a lack of preparation, or it was a lack of, moving the right puzzle pieces. And you're going to be faced with speed bumps and adversities, but you deal with them. And part of that decision making was after 3 years of playing Canadian high school football, especially back at that time in the early 80s, a lot of colleges were not coming up to Canada to recruit
Right.
football players. They
Right.
were for hockey, but not for football. And so my brother was at Kent State in Ohio, and he kind of came up with the idea of, would I be interested in moving down there to live with him for his senior year and then go into a senior year of high school down at Kent Roosevelt in Kent, Ohio, and kind of get some more exposure, or at least give myself the best chance. And luckily we had 5 players that were like, tier 1 recruits. And so it gave me exposure because scouts were coming to watch them, and then they'd be like, well, who's this guy? So that's how I got, noticed.
I have
And
to tell you, like, that's incredible foresight by your brother at that time.
it
I would
is.
never even thought about that.
Yeah,
And the fact that
yeah.
he, had you, what did were your parents okay with it?
They were cautious. My mom especially was tentative because, legally he would have to take guardianship in
Right.
the court because to then get enrolled in school and to be in the US and all that stuff. So it was all done, by the books and by the law. And that's what we did. And my parents, I kind of guilt tripped them. And I said, look, you guys escaped from Yugoslavia. I said, America's a lot like Canada. I said, I'm going with my brother,
Right. Right.
your other son, right? So that made it easier, the fact that I was going with my brother. And the foresight that he had and the discipline that he instilled along with my parents was crucial in in progression and development for myself.
I want to talk about your photography and then a foundation that you're very passionate about. But I want to hit you with two more quick things. One, talk about the in between the Packers and the Colts.
Yeah.
What was that like? How did you get yourself? You're on the down after leaving the Packers. Were you off for 2 years? How long were you in between?
Well, I was out of like I was officially out of football for 3 full seasons,
Yep.
like out of the league.
Yeah.
But really I was off the field for 4 full seasons because
Wow.
that my last year in Green Bay, I got put on injured reserve. Um, I got a concussion in preseason game, and then they put me on an 8 week, I think it was called PUP list, physically unable to perform because of the concussion. And then at 8 weeks, I think 6 weeks or 8 weeks, you have an option as a team to make a call on this player. Do we activate him or do we put him on IR? Once you get put on IR, you're done for the year.
Done. Yep.
So they, I was getting headaches at practice, and so they were like, we're just gonna put him on IR. So really, I hadn't stepped on the field since probably July, August of 92 until I stepped on the field in mini camp, which would have been April, May of 96.
That's incredible. In that time, what do you say to people? To me, it's all about how you bounced back. And I think, I'm sure there were so many ups and downs, questioning yourself, can I do this to me, what I'm trying to do is help people that are questioning
Yeah,
themselves and bring that why not me mentality. But
yeah,
I mean, fairness to them, you have the ability. I think that one thing they don't get is we're all the same in the mind, right? I mean,
yeah.
obviously there are different minds, but your stature is gave you that opportunity. But you had the same, I'm sure, issues of questioning yourself. But how did you get through that to say, I'm coming back, let's go?
Well, I don't have anything special that like we all have the same source that we want to draw from. It's whether we choose to draw from it or not. And you had mentioned that there was ups and downs in those 3 or 4 years that I was out of the game. No, there was pretty much just downs. And I kept saying to myself, it can't get worse, and it
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
And it kept getting worse, and it kept getting worse, and it kept getting worse. And then the miracle happens of sobriety, March 23rd of 95, and slowly start to rebuild back with no intentions of going back to play. I just wanted to be sober. I was gonna, be content with just a normal job, whatever that job was. I think at the time I was thinking to go into like forestry services and in the state of Michigan. But the thing is, I was only 28 years old.
Incredible.
And I thought to myself, at 6 months of being sober, I went from like 255 when I got sober to about 300 plus, like 300, let's say 300 pounds in 6 months of working out, sleeping, just doing the right things. And, supplement wise, like I wasn't even taking any creatine, not until I got to Indy, but everything was just, more or less just, your daily, mega packs, multiple
Yep.
vitamins. There was no steroids or
Right.
anything. There was none of that. And I got to within 10%, 15% of my all-time strength just being 6 months sober. And I thought, wow, like
Incredible.
this is crazy. Like I didn't believe that you could get that strong without the juice.
Hold
And
on. Hold on. What was the moment that you said? Because to me, this is the most important thing. People don't realize that they can do it.
yeah,
What hit you to say, I am doing this, I have got to get sober? And what was that day like?
it was a typical day as far as rinse and repeat as far as misery goes.
Yep.
So it became like a mundane, it wasn't there was an event, a friend had talked to me and he had basically just said, look, you're going to die if you don't change what you're doing. And so it wasn't like, oh, I mean, there were some aspects after that call that was a Louisville Slugger to the face, kind of
Yeah.
like, whoa, like I had a like realization. But one of the big things was I felt like I was out of the league for like 6 months, a year, but I was out of the league 3 years. And when he said that, I was like, what, 3 years? And at that
Because
time,
every day is like the same,
right,
and you're
it's the
just like,
same.
you don't know
It's the
what day it
same.
is.
Yeah, it's the same misery
Yeah.
and self-loathing and all that stuff. And at that point, I said, to myself, looked at myself in the mirror, and I was like, I, did not like the person I saw. And I was like, well, there is something I can do about it, if I choose to do it. So I was like, what do I have to lose? I'm already miserable. I'm already dying and a premature death. And so I ended up, going into treatment, uh, and following instructions, um, staying sober now over 29 years. But it
Freaking
was,
awesome, man.
it is it's it was a miracle that it happened, to be
Yeah.
honest. But can everybody can participate in that miracle if they want to.
If they want to.
If they want to, if so, we can talk to somebody till they're blue in the face, just like many people did to me before that. But until you're ready to hear it and until you're ready to change, it's not going to change.
So I'm going to just ask this because I ask it to everyone, and I've dealt with it, a lot in my life. It is true that nobody can make you do anything when it comes to
Correct.
getting sober, correct? You
Correct.
have to do it yourself. You can have support around you, but no one's going to force you to do it, right?
To this day, to
It's
this
incredible.
day. And where you the decision, I made or that we make as individuals to get sober or to make a change or to whatever it is, for me, I've always believed, I've been a believer in the Bible as being the ultimate truth, the ultimate source of truth. And I've believed that my whole life, although I didn't practice it.
Mm-hmm.
I believed it. And I believe, when I look back now, like, I'm 57. So when I look back, I was 28 when I got sober. A lot of my views obviously have changed as years have gone by. But I'll tell you what, 2020, as bad as 2020 was, from all the external things, and there were personal things that were just as bad in my life. As bad as that was, it was a great adversity because it really drove me back. Because I was like, I'm seeing things where people are, saying, hey, this is purple. And I'm going, no, it's black. And it's like, I'm talking like comment, like just flat
Right.
out stuff just wasn't making sense.
No.
And this was long before we knew a lot of the truths we know now from 3 years ago. And I'm not even going for stretch truths. I'm going for like easy truths. But it drove me back to that book. It drove me back to my source of authority. And, you know, whether people that listen to this roll their eyes or not is up to them.
Yeah,
It really is up to them.
totally.
It wasn't a 12-step program that got me sober. It was God. It wasn't like I knew that when I was 28. And I was like, okay, well, this 12-step program is a tool to use. And it served me very well. But I always knew deep down inside, this is a tool, but I know my real source of strength comes from that book and our creator. Now that's, people can eye roll, and I'm not going to apologize for saying that, but that's fine because
That's
I eye
you.
rolled and kept eye rolling myself into misery.
No doubt. Everybody has their own journey.
Yeah. Yeah.
TonyMandarich.com. Your photography is awesome.
Thank you.
Obviously, it's a passion of yours because it's really some unique, very cool pictures on there. Um, Also, you're really passionate about the Gregory H. Montgomery Jr. Foundation, really helping people with mental health. There's some events coming up in Florida. Talk to me about the foundation.
Yeah. So Greg was a former teammate at Michigan State and then was All-American. Just a great guy. Very he'll walk into a room and it's like you can't help but your attention go to him. But, you know, from his being articulate and flamboyant and just, he was just all in all a great human being and was an all-pro in the NFL for many years as a punter. And had struggles with mental issues. And I think, I think it was like in late, like I want to say it was like in 2000, somewhere between 15 and 19, he was diagnosed with being bipolar. And, in with 2020 happening, he obviously had struggled with that and ended up taking his own life. And, he was such a great guy, and his brother Steve, played on the team with us, and so it's like I knew the family and his sister Margot. So his sister Margot and Steve run his foundation that they created, and I'm not extremely connected with it, although I support it and will endorse it a ton as much as I can. Um, but I can't say, I mean, yeah, I have a passion for that one because that's a personal one. I knew those
Sure.
people and know those people. But I don't have too much to do with it directly.
No,
But
but your
it's something I
support for
support.
something like
It's
that
some, yeah,
is
it's
so important. I mean,
what his sister and brother are doing, what Margot and Steve are doing is pretty incredible. And they're on a charity event, golf event in Florida, I think on the 27th in a few days. And,
yep.
I won't be there, but it's and they've been doing this now more than a year, a couple years. And what they do and what they're doing is incredible.
All I can tell you is this. Like I said, why not me? Your story, I guarantee. Growing up, I'm 51. Like I said, I'll never forget that cover. And you
Yeah.
were a god to sports god to people like me at that time. Little do we know what you're actually
Oh,
going through,
yeah.
and you're human.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks because you have money and you're on the cover of sport, look at me, that everything's perfect. And that's what, to me, that's what I'm all about right now, is talking to people and showing people that are going through something that aren't on covers of Sports Illustrated,
Yeah.
that the big people, the larger than life people, have the same issues you do,
Yeah.
and they've gotten through them. And by the way, your journey is a little more difficult because you had so much than some of the other people. So if you can do it,
Yeah,
others
anybody
can
can
do
do
it.
it. Yeah, and that doesn't mean that mine was harder. It
No,
just, the circumstances were different. My emotional pain with grief or resentment is the same as yours. It's just because it's personal to ourselves, right? So, and it really kind of came down to once I got sober, it's like those things don't just disappear. It's like, how do you deal with those things? And how do you deal with those adversities? And, when I was lucky enough to get an opportunity to come back and play in Indy after 11 months of being sober, the reporters were like, aren't you like cautious about like putting yourself back out there as far as the football and your career, how it ended in Green Bay. And, I thought to myself, I have nothing to lose.
Nothing to
I
lose.
have nothing to lose. I'm already a bust. I already am horrible. I suck, everything. So I have nowhere to go but up.
Can't get any worse.
And it can't get any worse.
Nope.
And, they laughed, but I think they kind of realized, he's got a point. And
I have some gambling issues, and I went to some GA meetings, and
Mhm.
it was me and 70-year-old guys that go to the horse track. And I'll never forget one of them saying, someone said, "How do you get through it? Not gamble." He says, "Buddy of mine will come to my door and say, 'You want to go to the track today?' He goes, 'No, how about tomorrow?'"
Yeah,
And then the next day he comes to my door and says, "You want to go to the track today?" He's like, "Nah, what about tomorrow?" And
yeah,
I didn't get it at first. And now I finally get it.
yeah, yeah,
One day at a time.
yeah,
I mean, it's legitimately true. You just have to
yeah.
battle one day at a time.
Yeah, and for everybody. And
Everybody.
it doesn't matter if you're the CEO of a huge tech company in the valley. It doesn't matter if you're just a regular person, working a 9 to 5. There's nothing wrong with that. It's like the struggle is real for everybody,
Oh, yeah.
and everybody has the same amount to lose, as far as themselves goes, and which is the most important thing.
I cannot thank you enough. You're going to touch a lot of people. Thank you for the time. Congratulations on not on being on the cover of Sports Illustrated or being drafted second. That's all BS.
Yeah,
It's what you've accomplished in your life after that, and now helping people get through their issues. Because I don't think I just interviewed a guy that saved 200 more than 200 people from jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge, and I'm like, dude, you're a hero. And he's
yeah,
like, I'm not. I'm like, stop it. You are a hero. And I
yeah.
feel like the people that are doing what you're doing, able to talk about it, are people that really are the important people in life. So can't
Thank
thank you enough for your time.
I appreciate it. And thank you for asking me to come on, because I can see how that it's very important to you, and it's important to me. And just keeping it simple, fundamental, taking it, one day at a time, and and just getting better every day. Try to get better as a person.